Well, good morning from London and welcome to this FS Club webinar. Today we're talking about emerging Central and South Asian tech hubs, the Indonesian and Malaysia hubs of 10 years ago. It's going to be a heck of a broad survey, and we have with us Henry Tillman, who's the founder and the editor of China Investment Research at Grisson's Peak Services. Henry's a regular almost on these webinars, but also as an attendee, so a vibrant member of our community. Now, you know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I am one of the directors of Xi'an, and it really is a privilege to introduce so many of these webinars. And I can only do so thanks to the tolerance and generosity of our various sponsors, whom you can see here. All of them allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And today, as we're going to be looking at the digital Silk Road, we are going to be ranging quite widely across technology, economics, and finance. Now, my job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible and let you hear from our expert, Henry. Henry's going to talk a little bit longer than usual, an extra 5 minutes or so, because there's a tremendous amount of content, a lot of regions to cover, and a lot of concepts to get across. But we still have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So if I can take care of 3 elements of housekeeping. Firstly, this is being recorded, and the recording will be up in approximately 2 working days. So that will be sometime Wednesday, I hope. There are no slides for this one. Henry is holding on to the slides, and I think you'll see why. And thirdly, please do use the GoToWebinar Q&A facility on the screen there. I am here with you, so I will only get your signals, WhatsApps, WeChats, emails, and texts after we've come off, and that won't do us much good because we'd really like to have your comments, questions, and observations. So put them into the GoToWebinar Q&A facility, and I will feed them into a conversation with Henry at 11:30. So with no more ado, I'd like to start to hand over to Henry, as I said, founder and editor of China Investment Research at Grisson's Peak Services, who's going to walk us through these emerging tech hubs. Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just a second. Thank you very much, everyone. We have a lot of slides and very little time to get through them, but at a high level, what this actually is a look at the phase 2 of the Digital Silk Road. The first phase of that Digital Silk Road was actually the laying of the cables. The second phase of the Digital Silk Road is what you're seeing with all the technology investment in these hubs, these important countries. And what I found interesting in this is that most of the investment, as you will soon see in all these pages, in all these countries, is actually coming from international investors and not led by Chinese investors. So without further ado, first page is to show you how the Central Asian and South Asian hubs have a long way to go to catch their friends already in Southeast Asia. Singapore now at 60 billion. That was a few weeks ago. That's before the grab. Possible 40 billion SPAC reversal. Indonesia at 35 billion, and that's also before the recent merger between Tokopedia and Gojek, which is 18 billion. And then you see the Malaysia with 4 billion. You see the top line across as unicorns, and you see the line below of yet to be unicorns. So this is what it looks like today. It did not look like this 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which is why we want to show you how it looks today and what could happen in these other markets. The first of the markets is Kazakhstan. I'm not going to go through each of these lines because it's just too much information, but just, if you will, focus on the first and the last of the bullet points. The first bullet point is obviously it's the center of Eurasia, so ideal location. The second piece is the increased rail traffic because of COVID. It's exploded in 2020, and even in Q1 2021, it's up another 37%. So originally when they built this, so people understand, there were 11 trains crossing between China and Europe 10 years ago, and now you're looking at a 15,000 run rate for this year. That's the increase of flows and the importance, therefore, of Kazakhstan and rail traffic. AIFC, again, is a center. You'll find this on the web, so I won't spend much time on this. Simply to say, this is an important financial center built, as you'll see early in the process. Again, designed for a regional hub. AIX is the next to form, which was the AIX Stock Exchange. It took over from the KSE Stock Exchange. The ownership of that, as you see, is involving Shanghai Stock Exchange, and you'll also see the Silk Road Fund from China, and you'll also see Goldman Sachs. So you see roughly 34% of this is for strategic partnerships, all with international investors. Yep. We talk about highlights on the next page. You see, I'd say the two I want to draw to, three, I guess I want to draw to people's attention. Number one is the Caspe IPO, which is extraordinary, actually. So that IPO last year at 6.5 billion, it trebled in value. It's now worth 19 billion. It's the second largest of the year last year, fourth in all of Europe. A huge success. So well done, Kazakhstan, and well done, Caspe, with more room to run. The second to call out is the CCB, a standard branch of the RMB listing, both in AIX and also on Hong Kong Stock Exchange. A huge success, and it's the first Chinese RMB denominated bond in that region. Again, a huge success, which then led on, if you will, to follow in how that's going to be a clearing mechanism for AIX in the Belt Road market. And also to be at least highlighted is also the green bond issuance last year. I need to keep moving. On this page, I don't want to go through everything on it. It's simply to show you this is mostly mergers, domestic mergers with few exceptions. The second bullet point, 18, is an inbound purchase from China. Farther down, you'll see an inbound purchase in 2019 from Singapore. Yes, and so they're opening up not only domestically, but also internationally. The same is true in 2020 and 21. The largest transactions in the region actually just closed in April 21. Nova Resources is out of Holland. So again, these pages you see international investment coming in on the corporate side in Kazakhstan, not just IPOs. On the VC side, I'm a bit embarrassed here because we have asked for help from Kazakhstan and we couldn't find all this data. But at least you see a little bit of movement on 15, 16, 17. Again, this is pre-AIX or AIFC. You've seen some movement in 18 and 19 and much more movement in 20 and 21. I think it's worth pointing out that what you do see here is also Super Seeders, Seed Stars is USA, Skybridge USA, Quest Ventures Singapore, Global V Fund you see farther down is also Singapore. So again, Quest Ventures also Singapore. So again, you see while it's domestically, it's also attracting a great deal of international attention. I would say in Kazakhstan, unlike the others here, there is no angel network of any size at this point. So that's been a bit of a hamper to feed into the VC world and therefore to feed into those IPOs yet. Moving quickly to Uzbekistan, this is a star in the last couple of years, and it will be even more a star going forward. In terms of connectivity, you see Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have signed a deal for high-speed rail connecting the two countries together, really to promote tourism and also jobs along those the two countries. There's also a link now, a farther link between Uzbekistan farther into China. And that's also go through link. Ultimately, will go through links in most of the stands through Afghanistan into Pakistan as well, which then leads into the last piece, which is Uzbekistan links to Pakistani ports. So you have high-speed rail, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. You have lengthening rail from China all the way to Uzbekistan, and then you have use of ports, Uzbekistan to Pakistani ports. It's highly likely those ports become especially Gwadar, to become a key regional port for the whole area. Attracting global attention. This is quite a success story in terms of international debt markets. The first deal in February 2019 was $1 billion dual tranche 10-year. It was oversubscribed 4 times. What a story. And then you see 3 others in 19, 20, and 20. And then again, in the end of 2020, you see a dual tranche. One is international tranche, 10 years, and one's a domestic Samarkand bond, which is to do things like this means the markets love what you're doing, or else the really hot markets are both. But both of these are huge successes, and really they deserve a shout out. Uzbekistan has attracted a lot of attention from AIB And again, for clarity, AIIB is owned 26% by China, the other 74% by 100 other partners. So it's not, it may be China-led, but it's not a Chinese bank. It's a multilateral bank. You see 4 different facilities from Uzbekistan last year to AIIB. And I might add that AIIB is also linked this year to one of the 2 major sources of funding to government debt deficit in Kazakhstan. That's AIIB and ADB. It's together will have committed to, if you will, close that deficit. So again, AIIB is also again into Kazakhstan as well as into Uzbekistan. This is a great story. This is EBRD. There's no reason to read all this. It's just basically showing you the different ways they've been helpful, except if you look at line 4 of second bullet point. So far, EBRD has invested roughly 2 billion euros in 85 projects in Uzbekistan, and we consider that we can see that growing per year. As you see, the bottom bullet point, in January 2020, they did 576 million loan in 2019. So EBRD will continue to drive investment across debt and equity, I believe. FinTech, unlike the other markets, this is really nascent. It's currently very small. Only 7% of the population use online purchases for bills in 2019. There are a couple players at the top we'll show you about later. E-commerce really hasn't yet to develop, and the revenues to date have not been great. Here are a few of the players. PayMe and Click are 2 of the biggest players, but Humo also there or thereabouts, building digital wallet. So if you look, again, this is FinTech only, very light on e-commerce, virtually non-existent on MedTech, AgTech, or EdTech. It is attracting investment funds, however, just like Kazakhstan. So there's 3 funds already, including a VC fund in Uzbekistan. Again, these are regional funds from and as well as from Singapore, which you'll see is invested throughout the region. On the Uzbekistan Stock Exchange, you could see how it developed from 1994. You could see it was headed towards, by 2020, where the Koreans wanted to take control of the stock exchange. That did not happen, and instead the government began to focus on how they could improve the functionality of the exchange by wiring it, although I think Korea started that process. And from that, you see there's been lack of liquidity. This is designed for a large number of domestic privatizations. I think the same is true within Kazakhstan, which has been discussing a similar program for quite a long period of time. It just takes a period of time to be able to do these, as you know, from what's happened in the UK and other places around the world, which have gone through a series of these privatizations. It just takes time. I also, just one last piece on Uzbekistan, which I didn't put in here. Uzbekistan on M&A in the last few years, there have been 6 transactions of decent size in there, and they have all involved international parties. So this has not been sort of, if you will, a lockdown of just pure China, despite China's assistance into growing Uzbekistan's across many industries. So the first is TBC Bank in Georgia, bought PayMe. Nestle bought a domestic company in Uzbekistan. A Chinese company bought a trucks company in Uzbekistan. An Omani company invested in two of the largest shopping malls in Tashkent. A Singapore company invested in a wholesale distribution of textiles. And a UK company sold some of its businesses to a local player. So as you can see, almost all of these transactions have been, if you will, international parties. I might also just note that in terms of investment parties, earlier this year, a $1 billion fund was established between the USA, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan to invest in the country, including venture capital. So again, that's not all Chinese-led. In fact, there's very little Chinese-led in that. The last thing I just told you was really just USA. So you can see that there's this huge misperception that China is dominating these investments in these foreign markets. The next gets much more interesting. This is the one, if you talk to people in Singapore or Indonesia, this is the view that Bangladesh is the next Indonesia. So to give you some idea of where this started, I couldn't put all the data. I just thought I'd give you some histograms, but it started back as early as 16, and there were 4 deals that year. One was led by India, one by Japan, one by Indonesia, one in 2017 led by Indonesia. Yes, on the venture capital side. You see the flows. Maybe I should talk about just 1 second. I should talk about 19 and 20, 18, 19. So 18, there were 9 investments, and these were led from Singapore, USA, Australia, USA. Half of these at least were foreign. In 2019, of the 8, it was led by India, USA, Indonesia, USA, Singapore, and UK. In 2020, Austria, Portugal, Dubai, and 2021, Dubai and USA. So as you can see, a lot of those are really driven by foreign investment. The same is true in corporate transactions, just briefly. In 2016, that was led by a Malaysian and Japanese company in that corporate deal in a large telecom deal. 2017, it was by France. 2018 is China, Germany, and Japan. The largest transaction to date was a Japanese purchase of a local tobacco company. In 2019, it was Japan again and Germany. And in 2020, we see UK twice, one by CDC and one by Unilever, and one by Bangladesh, one domestic by Bangladesh. And in 2021 so far, it is just China. So again, being consistent, what we're saying, the activity does involve domestics, but it also is not leaning. It's not dominated by China. In fact, China is a small player in each of these numbers. There's the corporates we just talked about. Stock exchange, similar to, farther along in the process, but similar to Uzbekistan. This is it's the second largest in South Asia. I think I'd like to put you down to the 3rd from the bottom, though. 4th from the bottom. It's the best performance among Asian since last year, up 21% for the year, and 3rd from the bottom, where it's still the 4th largest PE ratio. So I think that's that says a lot in terms of future upside. Pakistan startups. IPO market. Sorry, I'm losing light. Sorry, I'm not sure. I'm still also got a camera.
Yeah, it seems to have frozen a little bit, Henry. But I'd suggest you just plow on.
Thank you. I've lost the camera. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you, Michael. On Pakistan, you see startups. You see there, it's at 2018. They're a little behind Bangladesh, but I could, as you see, in 2018, they already started the flow. If you will, again, from USA, UK, Sweden, UK again. If you look again at Series A, you see bigger players from China and also from Dubai. Yes. On 2020, 2019 financings, you see, I might also add in 2018, you see larger corporate plays, 2 major from China, 1 from Sweden and 1 from San Francisco. And then in 2019, we see, you see it on the page, you see a number of these investments that, again, are from Pakistan, but also attract the interest again from the region, from Oman. There again, the flows you see from 18, 19, and 20, and I think it's important to know that 20, with the COVID, it still shows significant growth. Sorry. PSX, important stock exchange, also is shown really tremendous growth. So you've seen the Chinese early in terms of buying stake. There's also a 20% stake by Lowell's 4%. Okay. Michael, I just close. I still continue.
We can see your slides super. They're looking very good. And obviously, you're losing a bit of bandwidth, so Peter's turned off the webcam, but we can see the Pakistan PSX slide, and we've got audio.
Thank you very much.
Keep going.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So to continue, you see the middle of the slide, which shows the ownership of the Pakistan exchange, and you also see the fact that there were 4 Chinese appointed to the board towards the end of the middle of 17, and also the focus was then on to follow up on SMEs. To follow, here are the flows of 15 through 20. Here's the pipeline through 2021, and like the other markets, this has been very hot. I would say it's my understanding that for the first time, a domestic Chinese renewable company, Three Gorges, is also supposed to IPO sometime this year in Pakistan, which would be a first. Then I move to Sri Lanka, which is also a very hot stock exchange. Let's start with venture capital first. They started a bit earlier back in 2010 with trying to build a angel network. By 2012, it was then picked up by 17, and then really you saw a government move to build the first digital VC fund in Sri Lanka in 2017, and then an actual angel fund in 2020. And then in 2021, the government's agreed to focus on how to build the tech ecosystem. So unlike many of these countries, this has a full component of government assistance, local angel network, and outreach to other countries. In particular, you see angel business from Singapore, Malaysia, China, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Korea in that broad angel network, which will then feed into IPOs down the road. So there are 5 different funds, if you will, seeding these investments. Some of these are quite small still, as you can see there, 2 to 5 million transaction sizes, and there are actually a couple of PE funds also active in this area. Those will ultimately find their way into the stock exchange. Colombo Stock Exchange itself is South Asia. You see, it hit also needs to be restructured, in the process of being restructured. Historically, capital from Scandinavian countries. Norway there. It has not really developed a debt securities trading operation at this point in time. Like you see in other regional stock exchanges, it was up 10.5% last year. Hugely successful. That's just last year alone. And you see the turnover is way up as it builds interest among investors at all different levels within Sri Lanka. And of course, they're digitizing this in order to increase flows as these things actually do come to market. In 2021 to date, you see it's up 25% already in the month of January alone. And you see the gains it's already produced. And if you look at the IPOs done to date, you see the first one, an individual power, a regional power producer, renewables power producer. It was 8 times oversubscribed, and it was done within 3 weeks. So there's, just as you see in the other places, they're doing the best they can to make these exchanges much more user friendly. You then see a writing service, which is not surprising to each of places that you'd see in Singapore and Malaysia. And then you see also the most recent one notified here at the end of April, which again is oversubscribed. So the market's really red hot, and we think that's going to be continuing throughout the year. So again, you have 5 countries, 5 exchanges at various different levels of development. None are controlled by any other outside party. They all have outside investors. All are attracting capital from various different parties around the world, from 4 different continents, and all are designed to be useful in privatizations, which they all need to, if you will, affect in the next couple of years. Now, where does that fit into the next level? Because just after, so we did Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, we probably did throw in Thailand and Vietnam in that place. So those are the next 5 we see, and then we see after that these 5 again, because they're all connected along the digital Silk Road. So we see UAE, Egypt, Saudi, Bahrain, etc. And you could see these markets in terms of VC are already attracting more capital already. I mean, the larger markets, obviously, but more capital than the last 5 we've shown you. So we see each of these things. As you know, the Belt and Road is designed on a regional Belt and Hub base, hub and spoke basis. We think these 5 are the second of the spokes, second of the hubs, as we said originally with the Indonesia, Malaysia, and we see these as these are the next ones. And you see already there's a lot of capital that's going to Bahrain earlier this year in terms of seed capital alone. Here's a couple deals so far this year. One is fintech and one is food tech in the MENA region. That's all I have in terms of slides. I don't know what happened to my visual, but I think that we tried to get through 46 slides in 25 minutes. So, Michael, I'm going to pass it back to you for Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Henry. And what we're going to do is take those slides back, and Peter's going to try and get your webcam on. Meanwhile, nevertheless, that was a heck of a run through, and we really appreciate it. Because I think there's some really very strong theses coming out here. I mean, one of these is that this entire region seems to be a welter of cross investment. What would you have to say to that then?
Well, I would say, first of all, that Singapore was a key driver of the success, and Hong Kong were key drivers of success in Indonesia, Malaysia, in that regional basis, and they could identify the keys to success in these other regional markets. So I would say that it's the success in Singapore, Malaysia, early days from these investors that suddenly realize this. You can certainly see it in many of these markets that are actually Singapore investors led, the 5 I just put up. So yes, I could see that, but I also think it's not just that. It's also China. It's also USA. I mean, I didn't show this, but 2 or 3 of the big the Bangladesh VCs this year have all been done by USA. So I think there's this whole misperception that the Belt and Road and all these regions are really dominated by China. It's just not true. I showed you many transactions where it's not at all the case. I mean, none of the Uzbekistan M&A had US in it, or one had China in it. Sorry, one had China. That's it. So I think there's, I'm trying to show that investors are global and they realize where there's a play to have, and many of them can see this coming because these are very competitive. Indonesia, Malaysia right now in venture capital are very competitive from an investment banking or venture capital point of view, whereas these are less competitive for the time being. Hence the reason for the webinar.
Jonathan Lieben, I was sort of curious, to what extent might Chinese investments be opaque and thereby exaggerating the extent of other foreign investors?
I have not found all the numbers I've shown you. I could reconcile, and I've not seen anything in here that's opaque. The DARAS data was not originally released in Pakistan, but you can find it now. So if you can't find it immediately, I mean, there certainly is a number of these transactions which there's not disclosed. That's normal in the West as well as in China. But everything I put in here, I've been able to reconcile.
Okay.
You can find it. It just takes more time.
Yeah. Edwina Morton, who knows quite a bit about world trade as a former master of the world traders, points out Japan does a lot of work in Southeast Asia, providing alternative sources of finance rather than China. But is Japan also active in Central Asia?
Well, the largest investment to date into Bangladesh on a corporate side is Japan Tobacco. And there are a series of these venture capital plays where Japan is a player in it. If you look at how clever Bangladesh has been financed the last 2 or 3 years, you'll see most of the infrastructure financing for Bangladesh the last 3 years have gone to Japan from Jinga, not from China. And so China's lost that business to Japan, actually.
Yeah.
And the largest port has already been awarded to China.
And
so I think that I don't think that's sorry.
A lot of these investments, are being compared with Western models. So, we hear about the Uber of every country and every region, for example. Do you have any comments on sort of the quality of some of these? I mean, take Caspe, for instance, which is enormous. How well does that stack up operationally against a typical Western company? We seem to have lost sound. Peter, would it be possible to try and swap to a dial-in?
I'm a buyer of Caspe. I think Caspe is going to be a regional play, not just a hefty market share.
My end as well. We'll see if we can swap Henry over now.
He said I can see that as a regional play.
Henry, we're going to the dial-in option that we was in the email. We're going to try and switch to
these other players.
Sound. I apologize, folks. It's sometimes it's difficult to think that we're living in a first world country with the variable internet quality we often get in Britain.
I'm connected by.
I've just passed those details on to Henry now, so hopefully we'll have him back online within the next couple of minutes.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Henry. Oh, that's good. Welcome back. Henry?
Yes.
Super. So thank you very much. So let's pick up on some of these questions here. Hugh Purser says, much of the investment mentioned appeared to focus on venture capital, bonds, and loans. What is the most likely exit strategy for VCs?
That's why I was talking. That's why I was spending time on the stock exchanges. I can see many of the there have been some exits, corporate exits. You saw PayMe with Georgia as a corporate exit, and you've seen 2 corporate exits with one fintech and one e-commerce with China. But I think the real issue is going to be on through stock exchanges. There's one of the largest fintech companies in Bangladesh is likely to list in the stock exchange this year. BD Cash is likely to list this year. And longer term, I could see Choco Family, which I mentioned in Kazakhstan, being a very interesting stock play for equity investors.
Okay. Hugh Purser is also interested. Do you have any key points to make about the regulatory framework in these countries?
Evolving is the answer. If you look at that's why I tried to show the macro level. Look how much change these countries have undergone in the last 3 years. The stuff I put up there for the last 3 years is enormous changes, whether it's connectivity to other countries, whether it's restructuring stock exchanges, whether it's restructuring shareholder ownership, whether it's attracting corporate capital. These are enormous changes. And I think they recognize, as you would appreciate, you're not going to attract that kind of capital if you can't move towards transparency and liquidity. So I think they're all headed en route at various different speeds to both transparency and liquidity. It's just taking time.
Yeah. There's been a lot made of, in particular, in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, and to a lesser degree the other ones, but I'd stick to Sri Lanka and Pakistan, that the BRI has been kind of a debt trap for them. Is there truth in that? And if so, how does that affect the investment landscape in those 2 countries?
Let's maybe talk at a high level first.
in July last year, SAIS Carey, which is Johns Hopkins University, said that they found no evidence of a debt trap in the 149 billion for Chinese loans. Then we saw in August, we saw Chatham House saying they could find no evidence. In September, we saw Brookings Institute and they could find no evidence. We found the finance minister from Sri Lanka saying there's no evidence. And our position, we've been tracking those loans since 2008. We could find no evidence. I think what you saw was people accepting those loans on the basis that the returns would come faster than they've come. So the cash flows have not been there to cover them. So, but in terms of loans, I've been on three credit committees of three of the world's largest banks. And I know no bank in the world which has had one default in 640 billion of loans. There's been one default, which everyone hangs on Montoda, which was an error on the part of China to do that. So I do think there's been, and people have learned over time. And if you will, right now, it's just people don't understand that Pakistan, of its 62 billion of loans, 53 are already implemented now in terms of projects. In Kazakhstan's 51 projects, and I think it's 31 billion, have also been, built or thereabouts. So that's 100 billion of the Belt and Road's 1 trillion. It's already been really built. So the whole purpose of this discussion was to show people they've moved from building these things and or restructuring the debt to actually building the next level, which is Digital Silk Road above it. So again, the cables are built. This is the first round through it, which is basically, as you see, fintech, e-commerce, and those sorts of things. But ultimately, it does go to the next level, which is once these are all, what I haven't talked about is basically China's investment in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in the last 2 years have been in manufacturing, which then you get 5G on top of that. So these will all be 5G countries, most likely from Huawei. So if you put that on top of that, you then become smart manufacturing and then smart transportation. That's where this accelerates in terms of the East much faster than the West has any idea and just doesn't want to listen.
He was also curious, can you describe in these 5 countries what, if any, are the key restrictions on foreign ownership?
Well, that's it. That's why I sort of said to you on this. I've gone through the M&A piece with you, which is basically you've seen a number of the almost all the Uzbekistan are cross-border deals, and they're owned by cross-border owners to date since 2019. Kazakhstan, you've seen 3 or 4 of those I mentioned, and those are actually controlled by foreigners. The largest transaction just closed in April of this year with the Netherlands. That's 2.75 billion. It's the biggest one done to date in the AIX, the biggest one done to date in the LSE, but it was acquired by the Dutch and it worked. So I think I don't see any restrictions to that. In fact, I would say one of the worries I have or concerns is that as these things evolve so quickly, I'm not sure domestic regulators understand how fast this could move. And I don't think there are that many protections put in these documents yet for people to come in and just swap. And these are very sophisticated investors throughout the world that know how to move and move quickly before these assets are actually acquired by foreigners. I don't think the protections are in place yet. It's moving too fast.
And these larger tech plays depend on a large consumer base, the 5G you spoke about, et cetera. How does the level of, say, GDP per capita in each country compare with the aspirations of these firms when they compare themselves with Western tech firms?
Another excellent question. So basically, many of these 5 years ago were simply frontier markets. It's moving so fast now. A lot of those are no longer frontier plays now. They're emerging markets plays, right? And these economies are going to change over time. So I think the whole thing is in flux. The reason to flag it now is because we're still 5 or 10 years behind. One of the quotes from Pegasus, it's a very smart group of venture capital players saying Bangladesh is only 4 years behind Indonesia. That's how fast this is catching up. And they have, I think, 25 million invested in 5 or 6 different plays, if not more, already in Bangladesh. So that's their view of the speed of this moving. So I think the prior question was a more relevant question: is do the regulators in these places have an idea how fast this can move? And I don't think so.
Wow. Another question that I think comes up with a lot of people is in the West, we've seen the rise of the tech giants, but these giants have ranged quite widely across numerous countries. So, across the EU and America in particular. And then they seem to be hitting some of these boundary issues with China and the Great Wall and relationships there. But are these techs that are emerging in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, are they going to be able to converge, or are they going to be kept effectively as national champions? What would prevent them operationally merging?
I think the Belt and Road is designed as I know it's as hub and spoke. And these are regional plays. So I see this. A lot of these are regional hubs playing. I mentioned before. Maybe I didn't mention, but I should have mentioned Kazakhstan's recent movement visit to Dubai. The question is, how do we build an ag fund between the two of us for a regional basis? So a lot of these are regional funds being built, and I don't see a lot of intervention from China. I think China was early in Pakistan with 2 moves, and a small move this year in Bangladesh. But that's it from a strategic point of view, in terms of all this technology moves. Although they are building infrastructure, but I think a lot of these are regional plays. There's no evidence of China mucking around with the regional plays. That's, we track a separate discussion for a separate day. So we track all that global investment from Alibaba, Tencent, et cetera, et cetera. Those are mostly in Western, in Western or small Asian plays. I've seen no evidence of Tencent or Alibaba in these 5 markets.
No. One of the great successes in Europe in terms of investment was UCITS on collective investments, which allowed effectively a passport for one to raise funds across Europe and get that out into the retail market as well. So we're seeing here a lot of savvy big investors coming in and making these plays, but it's going to broaden out. It needs to get into the generalized funds. There was a lot of discussion, I think about 5 years ago, emanating from Korea down to Australia about a Pan-Asian funds passport, which I don't think is really quite taken off in that way. Are there any discussions about some kind of Central Asia funds passport to open up the capital markets and remove some of those barriers?
I mentioned briefly in those documents that they're now starting to see retail players in these markets. Early days yet, still early days yet. But back to your point about ETFs, I think there's just been a partnership announced between the Shanghai Stock Exchange and the Korean Stock Exchange on ETFs. I think it was last week or very not too long ago. But they're still behind at this level. But they are finding a way to attract regional, local retail players as the next step. Again, most of these places didn't have an angel network, so it's because the stock exchanges are performing so aggressively that people are actually starting to put money in this locally.
Okay. Just time if we have for one kind of final question. I mean, you very kindly volunteered to do this and to really update our community on what's happening, and it is amazing. So we've always had this idea of Singapore as frankly very mature, and then you've positioned Malaysia, which is also quite mature, with Indonesia. So I found that interesting. You've now led us into 5 other countries, plus of course MENA, which is moving. In your opinion, the savvy investor would try and find ways to get into some of these emerging economies. Do you have any kind of general tips for our audience in terms of where they ought to focus their attention? Because it's a big, broad region and you can't cover it all. Well, you do, but we can't.
Well, the reason I put it in the order I put it, I think and Pegasus, I think, is a very strong message saying this is not going to last long in Bangladesh. It's going to be the same level of pricing that you're going to get in Indonesia in a very short period of time, right? And I think the same is true for my friends in Sri Lanka, and I think Pakistan is also heavily banked now. I think Pakistan had 2 venture capital funds in 2016 and now 27 at year in 2020. That's how fast money's chasing this stuff.
Wow.
Right? It's just, and I have a client probably on one of you guys listening today who was trying to raise money from UK investors about this, and they scratched their head saying, "You must be joking. This can't be happening." Well, actually, it is happening. It's just a long way away, and it sounds a bit odd because the country risk you have to take and all that regulatory risk you're talking about before. But I don't know. I look at the way to do this is find local partners. You know, I've mentioned a couple already. I think Bcash, Bangladesh, is going to be a real star, and I'm on the record saying that today. And I think that Toko family in Kazakhstan is going to be a real star. So I would, if I had friends in Kazakhstan or I had friends in Bangladesh, I would be talking to those companies. And there are a number of those like that in those funds, and that's why I gave you the names of the funds that are sitting on these different countries to incubate this. So stay tuned. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done all this work to sort of put it all there for people to see. We'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Henry. And I think it's a real illustration of what people often forget, which is the sigmoid curve that is in so much of finance, and you've got to catch it at its two inflection points. And the steep rise is a very short period. And I think a lot of us have looked at these developing countries as kind of stable. I don't mean the sense of politically, I mean as kind of a stable, sort of slightly boring investment. And now that it's getting exciting, it really is time to pay attention. And I appreciate you shining a torch on all of this and saying, look here, which is very helpful. Folks, again, some apologies for the quality of the audio in the middle. We're not sure what happened, but there is variable internet quality, as you'll know, in the United Kingdom. But I need to give 3 quick rounds of thanks. Firstly, to our sponsors, who are extremely kind and generous in allowing us to range, in this case, across most of Asia in a morning while we sit at our desks. Secondly, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for your kind contributions and feed into this discussion. And Henry, I'd also like to thank you, because I know that you've really gone out and done a lot of hard work, but are also sharing a tremendous amount of effectively proprietary information, really just to help the FS Club community. And for that, we also appreciate it. Unfortunately, as you know, I'm unable to open the floodgates of applause, but I do bring along to all of these meetings. This is from East Asia. This is my Korean karmic clapper, but hopefully it goes from Korea to Kazakhstan, and says thank you very much, Henry, and we hope to have you back as this very exciting area moves very swiftly.
Thank you very much, Michael, and to all for their time this morning. Thank you.